Hi everyone. I'm delighted to be here at Enigma today to present work that I've been doing with Patrick Gage Kelly, Tara Matthews, and Ellie Burstein with the help of many others on digital security and US political campaigns. To get started, I'd like to ask you to imagine something. What if your personal email account getting hacked could launch conspiracy theories that could lead to years of online and offline harassment of those you'd communicated with, contribute to foreign interference in what are supposed to be free and fair elections, as well as meaningfully disrupt democracy? As some of you may remember from 2016 here in the US, these are real risks for the population we're going to be talking about today. That is, people who are involved with political campaigns. Now, what if to help do your part to prevent that from happening, you have to fundamentally change your professional and personal technology-related habits and the habits of those you work with? And don't forget that you don't work in tech. You didn't study computer science, and your digital security knowledge is limited. Of course, this starts with your needing to understand that you really are a target and that the risk is very real. You may not fully appreciate that because this is all relatively new in the political campaign space, and you already have too much to do. You also need to have a reasonable understanding of the new threats you face and what to do about them, all while you're working in a fast-paced, hectic, temporary environment where winning the election is the top priority, and anything that doesn't clearly contribute to that is perceived to be a waste of time and effort, and may even be considered by some to be an irresponsible use of your time. Now, you might be thinking that not all hacks are going to lead to an outsized outcome like that, and you'd be right. But real damage to campaigns is very possible, and that can in turn weaken the small d democratic institution of elections. For example, as part of a congressional campaign committee hack in 2016, campaign strategy documents were leaked for a primary race for a seat in the House of Representatives. The candidate whose strategy documents were leaked lost that primary race. As the candidate explained to the New York Times, "It was like I was standing out there naked. Our entire internal strategy plan was made public, and suddenly all this material was out there and could be used against me." This example, as well as the higher profile attacks in the US of 2016, illustrate how security attacks on campaigns can damage campaigns and even change the outcome of elections. Security is an important part of winning elections and of protecting the small d democratic institution of elections. For the remainder of today's talk, we're going to briefly go over how the security needs and practices of people involved in political campaigns differ from other organizations and the general population. Then we'll talk about what we did, specifically our qualitative research with people who had extensive experience with US political campaigns, and our expert roundtable, where we brought together more than 40 experts from across the political spectrum, the technology industry, and academia to discuss how to improve security practices on political campaigns. We'll share two themes from our work that help highlight what a complicated space this is. First, the many accounts this population uses, and second, their account security practices, with a focus on their use and understanding of two-factor authentication. And we'll conclude by suggesting how the security community can help support this population moving forward. Since everyone can benefit from strong digital security practices, you may be wondering how campaigns are different from many other organizations or the general population. Here, a study participant summarized what campaigns are like. Campaigns are totally transient, and almost everybody gets hired in the 3 months prior to the election. There's really very few incentives for any kind of security rigor, because you're up against the clock, and faced with the ticking clock, everything pales. Let's talk about some key ways campaigns are different. For one thing, they face an outsized risk of being attacked compared to many organizations and the general population. Political campaigns are targeted by determined, well-resourced, sophisticated attackers, often nation-states. And their risk isn't the only thing that can be outsized. The outcomes can be too. A successful attack on someone from this population can range from embarrassing that individual or derailing their campaign to weakening democracy. The impact of an attack can be disproportionate for this population. Campaign culture is also different from other organizations, like the ones that many of you may work for. For one thing, campaigns are short-lived. Participants describe campaigns as being similar to startups, with a quick ramp-up, no existing security infrastructure, and an abrupt ending. Campaigns typically have only enough money to survive a hectic cycle of campaigning with minimal staff, depending on the race size or competitiveness, of course. These constraints can make investments in security a hard sell, especially at the beginning of the campaign, which is often also when processes and habits are established that can be difficult to change later in the cycle, even if security expertise is eventually brought on. Their short lifespan and limited financial resources also make campaigns chaotically busy. Intense time pressure can lead to the perception that there's little to no time for extra security. And finally, campaigns have amorphous boundaries. Campaigns work with people from many different external organizations, including consultants, committee staff, and volunteers. These organizations range from having no IT or security expertise to actually having pretty good IT and security expertise. Another boundary issue is about when the campaign officially begins. There are likely to be many communications about a potential run for office that precede any formal organization or infrastructure that may eventually be put in place. The end result of this long-established culture is that campaigns usually have little security knowledge and are unlikely to prioritize security. So a lot of what I just shared about campaigns was reasonably well known from many helpful articles in the press. However, in order to get a better understanding of how to help improve the security practices of this population, we needed a better understanding of how campaigns actually work, especially in light of the high-profile attacks of 2016. So to do this, our approach was to conduct qualitative user research to understand the security practices, challenges, and perceptions of people involved in campaigns, and then to bring together experts from across the political spectrum, tech industry, and academia in a roundtable to prioritize how to help in 2020 and beyond. For the qualitative research, we conducted in-depth interviews with a broad range of more than 25 people involved in US campaigns from across the political spectrum. Some were candidates, campaign managers, digital directors, IT staff, and more. While some worked directly on a campaign, others were from party committees, super PACs, campaign-specific service providers, and academia, all of whom provided some type of service or support for campaigns. Most of the participants had at least 10 to 20 years of experience, in some cases more, and they'd served in multiple roles with campaigns over the years. Most campaigns represented were federal, for example, for the House of Representatives, Senate, or President, though many of the participants had prior experience on other types of campaigns as well, for example, a gubernatorial race. For the expert roundtable, 44 people attended overall, not including the 3 of us who organized the event. 13 were from the Republican Party, 12 from the Democratic Party, 10 from tech companies, and 9 from academia or nonpartisan political nonprofits. 28 organizations in total were represented at the roundtable. Our focus in the expert roundtable was to discuss how to improve security practices on political campaigns. In particular, we aimed to come up with a single piece of security advice that was largely agreed upon by the experts in the roundtable for the 2020 cycle. With this piece of advice, we were hoping to both promote a consistent top piece of advice for the 2020 cycle and also help lay the foundation for a more security-focused culture moving forward. As part of the roundtable, we also asked for attendees' input on how our research findings related to their own experiences. There was broad agreement that our findings were pretty consistent with attendees' experiences, and that gave us additional confidence in what we learned from our qualitative research. In today's talk, we're going to focus on 2 themes that emerged from our work: account use and account security practices. As you can see from this participant quote, nation states are targeting anything that can make the campaign look bad, and many such things can be accessed via accounts. First, let's take a look at account use. We want to acknowledge that every campaign is different, but what we're about to share seems to hold pretty well across campaigns today. People involved with political campaigns likely use many different accounts for their campaign-related work. For example, the campaign might provide an account from a workplace system like a G Suite or M365, and maybe also something like Dropbox. People involved with campaigns might also use a communication tool like a Slack, Wickr, or Signal. There's probably a social media presence across various providers like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and maybe YouTube and TikTok too. They may use Zoom, FaceTime, Meet, Teams, Skype, or some other video or phone conference provider. They probably do some sort of campaign-related communications across their personal SMS, phone, and maybe, or really probably, their personal email and social media accounts too. There's a good chance that they updated their LinkedIn profile to mention their involvement with the campaign, and then there are the accounts for fundraising like an Act Blue or a Win Red, and the list just keeps going on. Of course, there are also campaign-related accounts that are hyper-shared or hyper-owned. These might be accounts for press, fundraising, hiring, and so on. Many workers need to access them, and ownership may change from cycle to cycle, or sometimes even within the cycle as the campaign grows or if there are staff changes. This broad set of accounts often spans many providers. They are a mix of accounts that were created by the campaign for the individual, by the individual for the campaign, and by the individual for other purposes, something they had before they joined the campaign and that they're probably going to continue to use after the campaign ends. And remember that a main goal of attackers is to go after anything that can make the campaign look bad. That means that they even target accounts that aren't used for campaign-related work, often personal email or social media accounts. When you consider the scope of anything that can derail, embarrass, or disrupt a campaign, a pretty broad set of accounts is potentially at risk. Now that we have a reasonable understanding of the set of accounts that need to be protected, let's consider some aspects of campaigns that play important roles in the digital security of accounts that are at risk. Most campaigns don't have IT staff, but even in the rare cases when they do, IT staff are unable to protect or control the many work and personal accounts that might be attacked. This can leave the communications and information vulnerable that, if leaked, could embarrass or otherwise harm the campaign. The individual is the only one who has access to all of the accounts they use that an attacker might target. This means that they need to understand that these accounts are at risk, that they need to do something about it, that they know what to do about it, and that they prioritize doing something about it over the myriad other important things they need to do for the campaign. Remember that until the widely publicized attacks of 2016, many of them spent little, if any, time thinking about account security. And if they did, they probably focused on their main G Suite or M365 account. And while awareness of digital security has improved considerably since 2016, as has an understanding by this population that digital security is important, there's still a big gap between what the actual security practices are and where security experts think they ought to be given the threat landscape. What this population has been focused on for quite a long time is winning the election. Every action that costs money or time is weighed against spending that resource on getting votes. For example, if better security means fewer ads, fewer staff, or is going to take extra time from important people, they wonder if it's worth it. And to return to a point made by Bob Lord at Enigma 2019, the account security offerings and user experience are not standardized across providers. That doesn't make it easier for this population. So since accounts are so important and there isn't an IT staff who can protect all of the accounts that are at risk, let's take a look at what account security practices are generally like on campaigns, with a focus on two-factor authentication, since that's a frequent recommendation from security experts for this population. As with most things, these practices vary across individuals from being pretty darn good, especially for some of those who had direct experience with one of the 2016 hacks, to maybe not so good, but we're going to present the general trends we learned about. Let's start with some good news. Most, and maybe all of them, have heard of two-factor authentication, and they probably use some form of it on at least one of their accounts. That said, it appears that two-factor is probably underutilized on those broad sets of accounts that are targeted, and when they do use it, they're likely to use a weaker second factor, like codes via SMS or an app generator, factors that many security experts don't consider to be strong enough for the threats that this population faces. Participants mentioned concerns about two-factor. A common one was that all second factors require users to take extra steps, and that means more time and effort. This mattered to busy participants who described prioritizing their efforts by only setting up two-factor on what they deemed to be important accounts, and that often excluded many of the types of accounts that are targeted, including personal accounts. Having access to their accounts is critical, and they worry that two-factor will keep them, or worse, the candidate, out of accounts. Some travel often and are concerned about having access to their second factors on airplanes, or when they don't have cell service or Wi-Fi, or when their phone's battery is dead. Others avoid security keys because they worry about not having it immediately at hand when needed. And they often don't have access to campaign tech support for help if they do get locked out, because the campaign probably doesn't have any tech support. Now, that said, account lockout is a real risk with two-factor. However, it seemed that the population was overestimating the likelihood or frequency of this happening and underestimating the importance of using stronger account security protections given the threats that they face. Still, others mention that two-factor often doesn't work well on those hyper-shared or hyper-owned accounts, especially if, for example, the account was established in a previous cycle and the codes are still being sent to a staffer from last cycle who's no longer part of the campaign. An important consideration is that many of them don't understand that different types of second factors offer different levels of protection. And when you're being targeted by determined, sophisticated, well-resourced attackers like they often are, the different factors can make a meaningful difference. On a related note, while they do understand that two-factor is important and helps secure their accounts, they often don't know or can't explain why, and they aren't aware that they should use it to protect most of their accounts. We believe that all of this contributes to an underuse of the most secure forms of two-factor on the various accounts of theirs that are targeted. So what does all of this mean? As you may have seen, 2 governmental election committees put out a joint statement in November that the November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. Google and Microsoft also issued statements that nation-states had attempted to hack the campaign and personal accounts of people on campaigns, but as far as they could tell, none of the attempts were successful. So is everything fixed? Are we good? No, everything isn't fixed. This population faces an evolving threat landscape. There are also plenty of elections around the world that are going to face similar challenges. And even in this most secure 2020 cycle in the US, several news articles in October reported confirmed as well as purported campaign-related hacks. We believe that security attacks like that shouldn't influence the outcomes of elections. As one of our participants explained, security and politics should be separate. If you're a candidate, you should win or lose on your best day based on who you are, not because your email got popped and posted online by a nation-state cybersecurity team. So if you're curious to know how you might be able to help this population moving forward, let's talk about what we as a security community can do. First, we think more research would help. From further foundational, exploratory research about the space to tactical usability studies of specific protections, we as a community could learn how to better support this population by further understanding them and their use of technology. This includes conducting research around the world and with an even broader range of campaigns and campaign workers, including down-ballot races, volunteers, and more. We also think that there's an opportunity to better support this population with very robust, very usable security protections. Protections that are robust enough to mitigate the serious and evolving threats this population faces while being very usable so they don't substantially add to the perceived time or effort to use them. Some requests from study participants and roundtable attendees to make protections more usable include considering what kind of standardization in offerings and experience is possible across the platforms, and what types of stronger protections might be enabled by default, that latter of which can be particularly complicated for services that have a broad user base. And back to the previous point, to do this well likely involves more user research. There's also a real opportunity to provide this population with security advice and education that's tailored to their needs and context, that prioritizes exactly what to do and why. And by prioritizing, we don't mean making everything a critical step. Ask yourself, who really needs to do what? And how's that going to help them win the election? What is a critical security action they really need to take versus something that's a really good idea, but maybe it's not critical? And deliver a consistent message. When they hear different or even similar things from different experts, that tends to complicate matters, not improve them. This suggests a real need for coordination and cooperation. So before I close, I want to share one more thought from a participant. What is 100% true is that foreign adversaries want information. The faster we all realize that, the better off we're going to be. To see politics and campaigns at all levels as a fundamental piece of democracy that needs to be protected. For sure, foreign adversaries are trying to attack our systems. Why wouldn't someone think of democracy as a target? please ask yourselves if you're in a position to help. Everyone has a role to play. Given the nature of how campaigns work, no one company, committee, campaign, support organization, or academic institution can fix this on their own. Patrick, Tara, Ellie, and I would like to extend a very big thank you to everyone who participated in our research, all of our roundtable attendees, and in several cases, their amazing assistants, the many people at Google who helped make this research and roundtable happen, and of course, to you for your time and attention. Thanks so much. I'd be happy to take your questions.